It was a bitter December morning when the storm rolled into a forgotten corner of Pennsylvania. Ice clung to power lines like whispered threats, and the small town of Ellendale braced for another hard winter. Among its rusted rooftops and shuttered factories, lived a man named Henry Trump, not the president, not a billionaire, just a retired civics teacher with a worn-out coat and a pocketful of quiet convictions. To most, Henry was invisible. He walked with a limp, spoke softly, and didn't own a smartphone. He lived alone in the creaking house he grew up in. Every morning, he made his coffee, fed the neighborhood strays, and wrote letters, handwritten, ink-stained letters, to Congress, to the governor, to mayors, to children he'd once taught. He always signed them the same way: "Remember, your power is not in your title, but in your kindness. H.T." Most of them went unread. But he never stopped writing. The day everything changed was the day the storm knocked out Ellendale's power grid. Temperatures dropped to 17 below. The town's few shelters filled within hours. Water froze in pipes. In the dark, people turned to their car engines for warmth, their fear huddled under thin blankets. For many, it felt like the end. But not for Henry. Without hesitation, he opened his home, every room, every inch. He walked the streets, knocking on doors with a flashlight and an old thermos of soup. "Come stay," he'd say, gently. "I have heat, I have food. And even if I didn't, I'd still have you." By nightfall, his home held 17 people, a single mother with twins, a retired coal miner and his dog, 2 teenagers who had been living in an abandoned truck, and a young man named Elijah who had once called Henry boring in civics class, and now called him Sir. Henry turned his living room into a nursery, his basement into a pantry, and his hallway into a chapel of warmth and whispered prayers. But what stunned the town wasn't just his hospitality, it was the ripple it caused. Inspired, Elijah broke into the shuttered library, not to steal, but to turn it into a shelter. The high school principal called off vacation and opened the gymnasium. The mayor, previously known for inaction, personally drove house to house delivering blankets. News spread. A local journalist, curious about this Trump who saved a town, came to write a story. She expected politics. She found something else. "Why do you do this?" she asked Henry, watching him mend a coat sleeve by candlelight. Henry looked up, tired but steady. "I taught kids for 40 years. I spent my life teaching them about presidents and laws. But no constitution, no executive order, ever healed a broken heart. Real power?" He placed a worn hand on his chest. "It's right here. Always has been." The story went viral. And while the world argued over policies and presidents, something miraculous bloomed in Ellendale. A bakery in Chicago sent bread. A girl in Arizona mailed scarves she knitted with her grandma. A tech company from Seattle paid to rebuild the town's generator. Donations poured in, not because Henry was powerful, but because his compassion reminded the world that it could be. Months later, when the snow had melted and spring returned, Elijah stood on the rebuilt town square with a folded paper in his hands. "It's a petition," he told Henry. "To rename the Civic Center. We want to call it the Henry Trump Hall of Humanity. For showing us that leadership isn't about ruling, but about reaching." Henry wept quietly that day. Not out of pride, but out of hope. He knew the storm had changed the town. But more than that, it had awakened something sleeping in all of them, the belief that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they led with heart. And across the country, a quiet movement began. People started using "trumping up kindness" as a phrase, to mean acts of radical compassion and courage. Not because of political legacy, but because of one man who wielded no authority, no wealth, and no fame, only the most unprecedented power of all: humanity. Moral. True leadership isn't found in titles or tweets. It lives in the hands that help, the hearts that open, and the courage to care when no one else will. No law can mandate compassion. But one act of selfless love can change the course of history.